The department is excited to work with you on this opportunity to discuss the state's formula for funding public education. Before we begin, the department would like to remind you of the following. Conversations on this topic are not intended to reflect on the current BEP funding formula. The current BEP funding formula will remain in place until a new funding formula is recommended to and approved by the Tennessee General Assembly. The public is encouraged to submit comments in writing to ensure that all communications are thoroughly documented and can be reviewed and considered in the future. Public comment is encouraged to focus on developing a new funding formula rather than revising the current funding formula. Consider what should be funded in a new funding formula and at what level. Subcommittees will be responsible for reviewing public comment and making recommendations for what should be included in a new funding formula. While all committees, subcommittees, and members of the public should feel free to communicate openly, documents and records may be subject to public inspection pursuant to the Tennessee Public Records Act and may be publicly posted or otherwise made available. All recommendations that are submitted by committees and subcommittees will be reviewed and considered, but not all recommendations will ultimately be included in the proposed new funding formula. All right, so we have gone over the statement. Ms. Corwin has taken attendance. One thing that I would like to add, if we could just quickly, we have some folks that weren't on the last call. If we could go through and everybody very briefly just introduce yourselves and kind of say what's your role, which organization you work with that has caused you to be invited to participate on the subcommittee. I'm Ted Horrell. I'm the superintendent of Lakeland School System. Angela?
Yes, I am Angela Huff, and I'm the interim director for the Clarksville Montgomery County School System.
Okay, I think we had Annette join us. Annette?
Hello, everyone. I'm Annette Tudor. I'm Director of Schools for Bristol City Schools.
Thank you for being with us. Ms. Cole, is it you today, or do you have Senator Rose?
Yes, sir. So Senator Rose is not in the office with me right now. He should be joining shortly. We just got off of another Zoom meeting, but I am just on the call taking notes for Senator Rose as of right now.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Cole. All right, Mr. Baum.
Yes, my name's Charlie Baum. I'm in the Tennessee State House. I represent District 37, which is part of Rutherford County, certainly a growing county with a growing school district.
Right, thank you. All right, we introduced Jamie Corwin. Do you want to speak on your role, Jamie?
Sure. Hi, I'm Jamie Corwin. I'm with the Tennessee Department of Ed. So I'm the core director for the East region of the state, 53 school districts on the eastern end. We do have one phone number, Ted. It's a 662 number.
Okay.
So I'm not so sure who that one is.
Well,
Ted, this is Dale Phillips in Sumner County, Director of Schools. That's my number. I'm out of the office, and so I'm using a different cell phone.
Great. Thank you for being with us. All right, Jason Golden.
Thank you. I'm Jason Golden, Superintendent for Williamson County Schools, just south of Nashville.
Great. All right, John Atkin.
Hey, thanks. I am John Atkin, Executive Director of the Association of Independent Municipal Schools, otherwise known as AIMS.
All right, thank you. And Bob Ebby.
Hi, I'm Bob Eby, Vice Chair of the State Board of Education, and also represent the 3rd Congressional District, live in Oak Ridge. Thank you.
All right, and then we had the phone number identified. Is that right? Yes, I think we did. All right, I think that's everybody I've got on my list. So thank you very much. Let me get back to my slides here. All right, so we're going to the, I'm trying to watch both. I'm looking at my own. On the friendly reminders slide here, they're asking just a reminder to make sure we look at the PowerPoint deck, engage with stakeholders between meetings, get that feedback, and you can talk to as many folks that you want, to whatever extent that you want, through really whatever vehicle that you would like to solicit feedback. We certainly don't have to, but it's been suggested that that would make our work here on the committee smoother. It's also noted that we each have our own expertise, and the state and the governor and the legislature, I know, want as many viewpoints as possible to try to come up with what this new funding model would look like. And that includes families and students and certainly community members, teachers, principals, administrators, all the folks to determine what they need. So we're going to go to the general overview of what we're doing today. But what I want to do just before we do that, because I know we have some folks that were not on the last meeting. So just to kind of summarize, basically what we've been tasked with doing is trying to come up with a student-based funding model. The examples that we've been given for what this would look like are having a base amount that you'll hear a lot, what goes in the base, a base amount, a financial amount that every single student in Tennessee would generate, no matter what their background, their circumstance, their geographic location, in any situation, no matter what, that would go in the base. So this would be an amount of funding that no matter who you are, every student every district would need basically to educate that student. And then the idea is that we would have multipliers or ratios perhaps on top of that base that would apply only to certain students. So for example, a special ed student might generate, just for example, might generate 5% of the base on top of the base, or an EL student, an English learner, might generate 3%, for example, on top of the base. Or perhaps if you have a concentration of poverty, as we do in a number of school systems, then that might generate a school-wide even or system-wide percentage on top of the base. So that's really the model in a nutshell. And if you haven't had a chance to go back and look at the slides from the initial meeting, which are still there in the folder, it really lays that out in some additional detail. So before we kind of move on into what we've been asked to discuss today, are there any questions or thoughts just about the general concept of kind of what we're being asked to discuss? All right, I'm not going to let it ride for too long, right? Okay, so for today, what we've been asked to do is list specific resources that we would like to see incorporated into the funding formula. And they're asking about, and you can read this here again, I won't read it to you. And it does make the point, this is not a spending formula. So we're not supposed to talk about the BEP, but I think we can compare and contrast. Like the BEP, this would be a funding formula, not a spending formula. So in other words, just because the formula allocates money to cover certain things, it's up to the district or the school, if it's a school-based model, to determine how the money's spent. So they're asking us to just start kind of spitballing. What are the things we must have that's a non-negotiable? A quality school system must provide funds for these things. What are things we really should have? And that's kind of a hard distinction for me. It says would not be mandatory, but are essential to ensure that the group receives access to a quality education. That may be hard to kind of split those hairs. What would be nice to have that's not essential, but would clearly have a benefit? Yeah. What's a long shot? So some things that maybe some just, pie in the sky dreams for education funding. So we're going to have an idea sharing and discussion. This is an initial brainstorming. So I think we can all agree this should be a safe space. There are no bad ideas. There are no dumb ideas. There are, no things that are taboo. Let's throw it out there and maybe we can refine what those ideas are over time, since this is a process. But mainly what they're asking us to do is get every single resource listed and kind of categorized into one of those areas. And we will be defining that. And one of the things they discussed is that we will start getting, and it was even contemplated that we would already have the feedback from the first public forums that they've had. We don't have that feedback yet, so we won't be discussing that, but let's just open it up. And my understanding is Ms. Corrin's going to take some notes for us. So just throw it out. When we think about a high quality education, if we were starting from scratch, from the ground up, what are the things that we know our students need?
Well, to start us out, they need teachers, and that's probably a big expense.
I think that's correct, and I believe I'm correct. It's the single biggest expense, and I think part of that's going to be determining what does it cost to hire a teacher. I think a lot of times when we talk about funding now, what we find in many districts is that the average salary for teachers is actually much higher than the amount that's funded currently per teacher. So I think that's certainly a great starting point for what goes in the base.
And Ted, that was our first one as well, funding teacher salaries and benefits at highly competitive levels compared with other states. So that was our first one. Our second one was to also provide competitive wages for our classified and non-exempt positions.
Right, and I think that's a great point, and I think that the use of that term competitive is important because it implies that we need to be looking at some other states and seeing who are we competing with and what are they paying. Great point.
Ted, money for instructional materials.
That sounds like a base need to me. Anybody disagree? And I also think it's important to note that the idea of instructional materials has changed pretty dramatically, just even over the last 5 or 6 years. I know we're all, or most of us, are looking at one-to-one technology, and getting the device is just the start. Then you have to go get the software, and a lot of times there's multiple softwares, and there's monitoring software, online security. How do we communicate with parents, in a way that's online as well. So, yep. Just throw it out. I won't call on folks. Just go ahead and.
Dollars for, go ahead.
Go ahead,
Sorry.
Annette.
Sorry, this has been said before. I think we said this on our previous meeting, but mental health supports, counselors, nurses, even social work, that kind of thing. And I know it's a hot topic now, and maybe that will fluctuate. So I think some sort of ability to focus on flexibility in spending so that 10 or 20 years from now, when the funding model hasn't changed again, there's flexibility in the model enough that we can change based on our student needs at the time. Now we need mental health supports. What's it going to be, later? CTE is a big focus as well. So focusing on funding for CTE, but that may not be the priority 10 years from now. So some flexibility in the model to adjust to whatever those needs are.
Let's on the nurses, just so we'll take a crack at categorizing. All right, school nurses. Is that a must-have, should have, nice to have?
For us, it's a must. It's a
Yes,
must
a must.
because of IEPs, 504s. Our nurses aren't largely doing the traditional thought of school nurses from a generation ago. They're actually doing procedures based on federal requirements.
I agree.
Okay, all right. I think we're saying nurses are a must-have. I think we'd all say school counselors are a must-have.
Yes.
Right. What about social workers?
Ted, can I ask? Well, you've got a list, but can I ask a question?
Please.
I'm thinking about the state rules and regs 0520, all that list of things that we must have. When we talk about must have, are they asking us to start from scratch in our minds of must have, or can we treat the state regs as we're required to have one principal, on down the line? Can we treat the state regs as threshold must-haves?
I think that's a great approach. It might save us some time if it's in the law.
Right.
All right.
Anyway,
so,
I'll let you keep going down your list.
Oh no, I was really just repeating kind of the several that Annette had mentioned, dealing with mental and social supports. So social workers is an example of one that I don't think it's in the law now, and I know some districts utilize it, some districts don't. I would be curious on that one, since it's one that kind of comes up. Is a social worker something that is essential to providing a quality education in Tennessee?
Ted, I'm glad to speak up to this, and I'm not sure who else utilizes or uses social workers. This is Dale Phillips in Sumner County, but we have for a number of years, and we've added to our total number each year. And I can tell you that it's especially especially during and post-pandemic, it's proven to be huge for us as far as just being able to manage some some issues that were both showing up at school, but also really revolved around situations outside of school at home, and providing some wraparound services for those students that were really in trauma and stress. And so for us, we have viewed that as an essential thing to be able to help provide support to students, and then ultimately to teachers and guidance counselors. It's a different skill set than what most of our guidance counselors are comfortable doing, and so it's been a big help for us.
Okay, great. All right. Let's make a note, Jamie, to get a list if there is a way to kind of categorize what are the things that are in law. I think the other question for some of those things is that I don't believe at this point, for example, that every school is required to have an assistant principal. Is that essential, or are there some, or is there a threshold by which schools need assistant principals, or their own guidance counselor, for example? I think that's especially the way the BEP works. Again, I know we're not doing the BEP, but how many does each school need, or how many per student are needed?
My gut tells me that having school counselor is a must. This is Jason, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
My gut tells me having a school counselor is a must, but then how many in the ratio is probably in the should.
Okay. Right. I think that's a good distinction.
I think that's great. I think, I'd go ahead.
I was just going to say, we do everything based on ratios and a formula for assigning staff and resources out to buildings. But, we have a cutoff that all of our principals are aware of that, we use for assistant principals in the elementary schools. So, if your enrollment count is consistently less than X, then you don't have an assistant principal.
But isn't that talking about a resource base as opposed to student need? And so, what is the student need, and would it be a should have if it's not a must have?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think. Okay, let's see. Paul, Senator Rose is asking, can you unmute me? I got a text. Jamie, do you know how to do that? I think you're driving the.
Who was it again?
Senator Rose.
Okay.
He may be that new 901 phone number. Oh, I think I see it. But you'll have to do it. Yeah, Bob, I think you're correct in that. Again, it's hard not to think about it from that resource base, because that's what we're used to. And then yet again, if we're trying to figure out what goes in the base, it's almost like at some point you do have to decide. If we're saying that we need, every student gets a piece of a counselor's salary, that goes with them, how big is that piece? And you have to decide what is the salary and how many kids. Again, it's student based, but it's hard not to think of it in that sense. And that may not be something we're able to answer here. But what I heard from the feedback was that, having an assistant principal is not a must have depending on the numbers. But it kind of becomes a should have depending on where you are.
So Ted, that number, it has themselves self-muted. So I cannot unmute. So if that is actually him.
Okay, Senator Rose, can you hear us? That's they're saying you may have to unmute yourself. We want to hear from you, so hopefully you can do that.
Or drop in the chat. You can write in the chat.
Yeah.
Write in the chat.
Hey, Ted, if we go back to must-have,
Go for it.
the capital needs, I know we're on the fast-growing suburban community committee, obviously for that, but I think every student must have a safe building, however we codify that or however that's funded, safe, well ventilated, all the things that go along with a good learning environment.
I think that's a great point, especially for this committee.
Adequate transportation.
So let's talk a little bit about that. We are funded for transportation, but transportation, I think as most of us know, is not required. It's not required that school districts provide transportation. Should it be? It's just a thought to throw out.
I would say that it was vital to our success in summer school. Without transportation, we wouldn't have had nearly the participation that we had, and those are the most needy at-risk students that actually attended our summer school. So if we want those kids to come to school, I think it's pretty essential.
And that
Okay,
occurred
this is
with
Jason.
us too. I'm sorry, go ahead, Jason.
Go ahead, Angela.
Now, I was going to say that occurred with us too in Clarksville, Montgomery, with those students that we really needed to participate in summer school. Having that transportation helped us to do so. So I would agree.
In my experience, any geographically large LEA is going to say it's a must.
Must.
And I don't, I'm not a member of a geographically small municipal school. So that'd be my question. Does every LEA in the state believe it's a must? And
I'm part of a certainly small school system. Geographically, it's a bit spread out, but even if it wasn't, I still believe it's a must. I mean, we have kids that get on buses in neighborhoods that are not really very far, and that's how those kids get to school every day. The parents are at work, and there's various reasons that they wouldn't be able to. I'm always surprised when I'm reminded or remind myself that it's not required. Certainly be nice to have the money on one sense to use for other things, but it's hard to think about running a school system without putting those kids on buses and getting them to school.
well, then for our purposes as a municipal high growth and suburban, it probably is on us to describe that and include that as a must.
I agree with that.
Okay, good. All right.
What about pre-K? Where would that go in?
I feel like it's a must. And I know we're one of the very few districts in Tennessee that doesn't qualify for voluntary pre-K due to our size and our economic situation. And this is something I've tried to sound the alarm on, but I don't get a lot of people behind me because there's not a lot in this category. We've got 3, federally required preschool classes that are not funded at all in the current funding formula. So I thank you for bringing that up. I absolutely think it's a must.
I suspect that's a tough one statewide. Of course, for us, the threshold is EC is a must, and we have peers, of course, like everyone else. Our pre-K is tiny compared to our EC. And just for those of you who might not know, early childhood is students with disabilities age 3 and up, and then pre-K, is obviously students before kindergarten. We struggle with that very question of, is pre-K a must when we have the students with disabilities with peers? So I'd be curious to find out, from any others. We have the program, we have the match, right, that the state gives us. And Ted, you shared that you don't even get that match.
That's correct. And thank you for making that distinction. I don't think I can say that. I agree. I think it's too big a bite to say universal pre-K. I was speaking about.
Let me just chime in with this. It's pre-K is very, very popular politically But there have been academic studies that show that it doesn't produce long-term gains. One of the most famous studies coming out of Vanderbilt about 4 or 5 years ago. And then I think there have been others since then. That may at some point be part of the conversation when resources get scarce, whether pre-K has long-lasting beneficial impacts or whether they're very, very short-term impacts that fade out by the 2nd or 3rd grade.
Okay, great. Thank you. Great feedback, and certainly something to consider. So I think we know that the special needs pre-K is a must. It's part of federal law right now, so it's something that has to be funded. So but I guess that's not part of the base for every student. So that would be one of the ones that was I don't remember the term they used, a categorical, I think, formula or program formula. Okay, but let's definitely have it on the list. At some point, it's got to be addressed. What else?
Adding the must-haves? Adding that to the must-haves?
No, I don't think it's a must-have in the base, I think is what we're saying. I think it's kind of its own category. So I'd have to go back and look and see what that category was.
Sounds good.
Any other thoughts?
Ted, I don't know how to probably say this as well as it should be. Anything that requires additional funding for any of our accountability measures in districts, and I'm thinking high school, obviously more. But if it's a question of money for equipment to satisfy an EPSO through a dual enrollment class or ACT or any of those types of things, if we're held accountable for it, I almost feel like we've got to have adequate funding to be able to provide those opportunities.
Totally agree, and great point.
Ted, we talked about here, just any kind of item that's required by law and that's not funded, like any kind of unfunded kind of mandates that districts have to handle, making sure those things are covered within the funding.
Yep, absolutely. I'm trying to figure out what was the name of that category of things. Where did it go?
Program sounds familiar. I'm not on my laptop. I can't look it up for you.
Oh, categorical.
Categorical.
Districts receive dollars that are tied to specific programs and services, and use of those funds is limited to those areas. This is typically seen in federal funding. So I think some of those are going there. One of the ones that I don't think it's on the state requirements list, but we all have to do it, is building maintenance and cleanliness, custodial services. I think that's obviously at a must-have.
This wouldn't be a must-have. It might be a should or nice to have, or maybe a long shot, but full funding for the middle college program, the dual enrollment program. Right now, the students have to pay for their own classes. I think this legislature passed approve up to 4 classes paid, but that's something I know that a lot of schools are looking at, how you pay for that. Now again, that's dual enrollment, so that's but it is classes that's taken in high school.
Excellent point. Yep.
Dr. Horace Paul, I was on my phone. I just got to my computer. Someone mentioned safety, and I just zero in on that. When we think about safety, it's more than just an off on campus, but having points of egress and ingress to make sure that we're able to watch and closely monitor who comes on the campus. If you were building from scratch, you would have a few points of entry. and that makes it a little bit more affordable to secure the building. And then going to the dual enrollment, I think also to try make sure we're identifying those children that are wired for industrial and mechanical trades rather than college. I think we recognize that more now than we did a few years ago, but certainly to try to find those people even in middle school. What are your desires and what are you gifted to do? So that's a few thoughts.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Yeah, we are, for example, we are all required to do interest inventories in certain grade levels, but you know, they all, I guess there is a state one that's been introduced, but a lot of the ones that we use do cost money.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking of youth science and some of the ones like that are a little more robust. What else? Just brainstorming. What do kids need?
I know we talked about a lot of, has anybody mentioned in the list of our RTI folks in the schools? I know that's required now, but the funding for that piece, we've danced around teachers and assistants and everything else.
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about earlier, those unfunded things that we're required to do. And RTI is certainly a part of that.
I think another must would be the continuation of the summer camp, summer programs.
I think that's a good one.
This pie is getting bigger and bigger, isn't it?
A big pie. Let me ask one. I'll throw this one out there, and it may be in the there are, I don't know, a bad idea or what, or a silly idea. What about athletics? I know a lot of us spend a lot of money paying coaches stipends and paying for athletic programs, specifically in high school. Is that all the way in the long shot nice to have? Is it things we should be expected to offer to the, you know, high school students in particular? Should we all be on our own for that? There are a lot of needy communities that I think can't offer the quality of athletic programs that others can. Is that something is that part of a well-rounded education? Or I'd say fine arts would be in the same category.
Well, our vision statement in Williamson is that we'll provide a supportive environment to challenge students to pursue excellence in academics, athletics, and the arts. There are some basic state requirements for related arts classes, and we've treated those as must. As I sit here and think about funding, it's hard to say under the definition that's sitting before us, those resources required as a result of federal and/or state law for safety or similar, you know, for all that to be a must unless it's within the graduation requirements. We see it in, you know, for us as a must based on, you know, our community's vision, but based on the definition of what we're asked to do, I'm thinking that we need to drive that by graduation requirements, by class requirements at the elementary level, et cetera.
Okay.
But I'm open to argument, of course.
Ted, you know how I'm gonna agree with you on the extracurricular activity piece. You know, even though it may not be a part of a base, it could surely be considered as, you know, some type of additional weighted percentage above the base to help, you know, offset some of the costs. Because athletic programs, even though parents are very supportive in a lot of communities, are not able to do that, like you said. So any funding that could come from the school would be a help. I mean, from the formula, excuse me.
Mm-hmm. So would we think that would be a nice to have, or maybe even a long shot?
Nice to have would be what I would say. I would probably say should have, but I don't think I could get the votes. Might be able to.
I think it's important if you put athletics, and I certainly support athletics, is you do need to put the arts or robotic programs or any of the other programs. It's not just athletics.
That's why I've said extracurricular activities. Any of those could fit in that.
Because we're really talking about, we talk about kids' mental health and how do we keep kids engaged and how do we get kids to school? It's not a secret. Those are the things that, help in those areas quite a bit. Having a reason to wake up and get on the bus and come to school every day.
If every community in the state has made a decision that blank needs to be part of schools, it strikes me as at least as a should.
Yeah.
Well, along that line too, Ted, it builds the ability to get along, to know what teamwork is about, whether it's the arts, a band, athletic program. I mean, those are build skills that they'll use later in life. I think it's I definitely think it's a should have.
Okay, I can get on board with that for sure.
I agree.
Okay. I like it. All right. Anything else? I know there's lots of things else.
Yeah.
Ted, earlier, instructional materials was mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
Want to bring that one back up?
Oh, you mean in terms of which category it would go in? Well, that's definitely a must-have. I think how do you quantify that is I think probably the challenge. How much should each student generate in terms of instructional materials? Any other thoughts on that?
Must-have.
Must-have, yeah.
Yeah, and must-have to me goes along with it, since a lot of people are going, one-to-one and using the platforms for instruction in a lot of ways, but a must-have in order to do that is obviously adequate Wi-Fi, broadband, however you want to say it. Every student's going to have access to that, both at school and home. So to me, that's a must-have, and in some communities, that's not true now.
That's a great point.
What about alternative teacher licensure pathways, grow your own programs, et cetera? Those require additional resources, financial resources?
Absolutely. That's a great point. Is that a should have probably? I mean,
Ted, I tell you another thing that I'm not sure where it's going to fall in, and I sure don't want to hurt any teachers' feelings, but we think about funding our teachers. What's going on in Shelby County, Bartlett, Carville, and Arlington with the trades programs where they've got these medical device manufacturers, and you think about Ford coming in, where these companies are putting these multi-million-dollar pieces of equipment into school. And then you've got to have someone that knows how to operate those and show those students how to run them. And again, we're talking about funding teachers, but the folks that know how to run those machines and can teach, they're going to make $80,000 to $120,000 at a manufacturing facility, and you can't get enough of them. And then the schools in our area are pleading for people to come in and show these students how to run them, and they're looking at the salary. So I don't know how we answer that question, but that's a conundrum for sure.
It is, and thank you for putting such a fine point on it. That's exactly the challenge, and those are exactly the conversations. Sometimes I've certainly been in the position where you get excited about somebody, and then maybe they didn't ask or maybe they didn't think about it, but you get to the point where they look in the face of what you're talking about paying them, and they say, "Now what?" And then sometimes you're also saying, and then you've got to go take a course on classroom management and maybe pay for that yourself. I mean, it's a very awkward conversation. Great point. All right, what else? I think we're getting some good thoughts out there.
We spoke
I've got to
broadly.
sign off. I apologize. I got to go get Jody out of the American Girl doll store, or she's fixing to kill me. My bank account.
But we're not going to be able to cover that, Mr. Atkin. You're on your own for that one. That's pie in the sky. Buy your own girl dolls. All right.
I'll see you at Opryland in a few hours.
Okay, we'll see you.
All right, take care.
All right. Jason, I think you were about to add something.
I was about to say something, but I lost my train of thought on that because my girls are in college. I had a flashback to American Girls. But we spoke broadly about teachers, and I'm wondering about the scope of that and, licensed staff. I don't know that we differentiated general ed teachers and special ed teachers and CCTE teachers. I don't know if you want to break that down any. I think about school psychologists, some of the special education services that are going to be required, the whole laundry list, SLPs, OTs, every item that constitutes FAPE in a special education setting. Those are all must, but it's hard to define how much because it's driven by students. On the operational side, we've mentioned buildings. There has to be maintenance personnel. We need technology personnel to support. We mentioned transportation. Has anyone mentioned cafeteria? Of course, that's the enterprise fund. Are we going to completely keep that separate? It strikes me that we probably should if we're talking about BEP. But I thought I'd broach that subject just as an FYI.
It's a great question. Yeah, I think I don't know how we just from the federal funding standpoint, I think that probably stays separate, I'd assume. And I guess the question is, are there things on top of it that we wind up being responsible for that aren't covered by those funds as well? Let's just make a note of that. Maybe we can figure out what direction we're kind of expected to go on that one. I'll bring one up that's wound up being really it started off as a would be nice, and now I don't know how we'd function without it. We've got a rapidly growing EL, English learners population, and we hired a bilingual facilitator is what we call her. She's basically a translator. I don't know how we would run school these days without her. She translates documents. She works with parents. And maybe that's one, depending on, it may be one of those ratios on top of, depending on your population, but we've got to have it based on our population right now. You said you too. Anybody else have thoughts on that?
No, we have that in Clarksville as well. So it's something that we are funding, and so we need to continue that. We have it. I have it on our list right now as a must-have.
Okay, great. I'm on the same page.
I don't know if anyone has brought this up yet or not, but you know how, and I know we're not discussing BEP, Ted.
You're doing fine.
But you know how it's calculated based on the year before. And so when you receive your dollars, it's from the year before, but not your present year. So, it's a lag. And so just wondering, because for us, we grow so many students every single year. And so when we're receiving those dollars, it's not for our current year. And so looking at maybe with this new funding plan, if you can receive actual monies as opposed to a lagging amount. Do you understand what I'm trying to say?
I do, and in fact, that has been addressed, at least tangentially, not finally and completely, but it has been suggested that a student-based model, one of the advantages might be that it makes it easier to do that in real time, and that you could actually recalculate multiple times a year instead of waiting for those magic periods where we do the ADA at this point. So I do believe that's part of the conversation.
Great.
We haven't talked about physical therapists and occupational therapists and speech therapists and the kind of things that, again, that's probably not in the base. That's going to be on top of, but obviously those are Those are required services. Professional development, just on top of teacher salaries is, does anybody that thinks that's not a must-have?
Some amount of it's required.
It's required to keep your license.
Right. Any other thoughts? Wardrobe? I'm just kidding. Obviously, I think some analysis of utilities. I know these are basic things, but the things that, the bills that come in every month. We talk about internet, just basic utilities.
Ted, I can't remember what's on the list and what's not. Have we mentioned the actual school building?
We talked a little bit about building maintenance. We talked about in our communities just the need to make sure that we're able to keep up with the growth and provide everybody with a quality building. So that was
Well, I thought I would mention that because I believe we represent suburban growing school districts, and
Yes.
that means we're not only maintaining buildings, but we're needing to build new buildings. I can share with you that in Rutherford County, we're adding 1,000 or more new students to the system a year. That might have gotten interrupted during the COVID year. But prior to that, we had been adding 1,000 new students a year to the system, which basically means a new school building each year. And so the Rutherford County Commission and the school board have a 5-year building plan that currently and in several for this last decade or so has called for, on average, about 1 new school to be built a year. That means you got to start construction sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 years in advance, at least if you consider picking out the land and getting the architect to see how the land lays and how to put the building on the land. So it ends up being sort of a multi-year process, but Rutherford County on average builds 1 new school building a year, and other growing districts may also experience that. And a new high school recently has been costing $75 million or more, maybe a middle school $50 to $60 million, elementary schools maybe a little bit less, and those prices may have even gone up with sort of the new economic conditions, inflation, disruptions to the supply chain. But if we are in suburban districts that are growing, then building new schools is going to be important. It's not going to be something that's important for some of our rural districts that maybe are not growing, but I know it's put a lot of financial pressure on Rutherford County. And at the moment, the state's BEP formula doesn't directly address that.
And along those lines, Representative Baum is I think a master plan for those growing communities, because Charlie, just because you want to build a school and you have to have you have the money, you might not have the land. If somebody didn't look ahead to say, we're going to need this school and we've got to purchase land. I realize it may not be the school district that buys it, but that plan has to be in place so adequate planning can be done.
You're exactly right, and that's why the Rutherford County school system has needed this 5-year plan. They will go to the commission and ask for funding to buy a piece of land on which a school may not be built for 5 or 10 years. But the commission hopefully understands the need to plan ahead like that, so that even though it doesn't seem exciting to allocate millions of dollars for land, when a school won't be operational on that land for many years, you've got to plan ahead and get started on that process.
You're exactly right, and thank you for flagging that. Where our school system just spent $700,000 on a piece of land, I really think we won't need for 20 years. But the land's going so quickly, it's all being developed, that by the time we outgrow our combined middle and high school space and need a standalone middle school, if we're not thinking about that now, then it won't be there. So I think that's a great point. And we're having to pay that out of fund balance, or the construction costs just go to our municipal board to come up with the money, and we're a population of 14,000 people.
That's right. And when a school district like yours or mine makes the decision to build a new school, there's no change in state funding when that decision is made from however many schools you have had to adding one more. State funding doesn't change at all. And that may be a point that this committee needs to emphasize, because it's probably not going to be a point that some of the other committees emphasize, because it's not really a need for some of the rural communities, for communities that are shrinking in population. That may also be true of some urban communities, I'm not sure, but that's something that should be important to this community that may not get a lot of airtime from other committees if we don't. And so it may be important for us to emphasize that. All the committees are going to say we need teachers, but this committee may be in a unique position to share this concern about building schools that cost $75–80 million each. At least some of the larger schools do, and that puts a tremendous amount of pressure on the local school board and county commissions and cities.
That's a great point, and I think you're right. It's not one that would come up, and I think you're making this point as well. The problem is let's say you get an elementary school that was built for 1,000 kids, and you've got 1,200, and then you open this new school, and then all of a sudden those 1,200 kids are in two different schools, and they've each got 600. You didn't get any more money, but you need another principal, you need another plant manager, you need new utility bills for that school, you need the maintenance. It's very challenging.
I totally agree with what he's saying. We're opening up a new middle school in August, and then a high school the following year, and we're growing exactly like they're growing in Rutherford, and so we have to go before our commission, to be able to purchase the land and to be able to build these buildings. And so I agree that this committee is very different from some of the other committees with what we are experiencing within our systems.
Great point, Representative Bond. Thank you for flagging that. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, Representative Baum triggered something. His story about Rutherford it parallels our story next door. I think Rutherford is actually your growth is a tiny bit more than ours actually in the last few years. Although we've rebounded already from COVID, and we grew 1,869 students from end of first 4 weeks last year to this year, after having dropped prior. So we've already netted above where we were before COVID. I'm thinking about this in two contexts that Representative Baum triggered in my mind. One is the buildings itself, the buildings themselves, some kind of factor for growth. And then second, for staffing, because once you open a new school, some of your baseline staffing, your economies of scale, if you will, are firm. And so if it's exclusively a per student factor, in that context, the number of schools that you have is going to create a variable that doesn't get funded. I don't know how to address that, but I see it as two issues: growth with the cost of the new buildings, and then the annual operational cost.
Yep. Great points, and I think this is helpful. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We've got about 5 minutes left on the scheduled call, and in this case, I need to get down and make sure my school board didn't met a new superintendent downstairs at the Opryland Gaylord. Can't leave them alone for too long. Any final thoughts? This is just the beginning again, and Angela put together a great list that I didn't have time to really review too much beforehand, but she's obviously soliciting feedback. I think what we want to do is continue to think through the ideas that we've been brought up. Some of them more traditional, some of them a little more out of the box, and kind of contemplate those. The next meeting that we have scheduled is December 10th, same time at noon. I guess when they did that little survey, everybody likes to meet during lunch, I guess, or sometime around then. And then we're going to continue to discuss, categorize, and cost feedback. And I think by then we'll certainly have some of the public feedback as well. But if anybody wants to, if you get feedback and you'd like to send it to me, I can keep it all on a Google Doc, and we can have it together for the next meeting. Angela, if it's okay with you, I'm going to share your thoughts with the whole of the group at some point. Does that work for you?
That is fine.
Okay, I'd say really anything you send me, make it clear if you don't want me forwarding it to the rest of the group for their own consideration. But are there any final thoughts here in the last few minutes?
Ted, one of the things that I'll have to do before we officially wrap is it is my responsibility to read out the recommendations, and then those will be sent to you for your final approval before they're sent to the steering committee. So I'll go through them quickly, and then when they get to you, definitely feel like you can shuffle them around if you need to per category. But currently in the must-have, we have school nurses, school counselors, buildings, and in parenthetical, I put safety, construction costs due to expansion, custodial services, internet, and a ... because I think that probably includes a lot of other things. Transportation, dual enrollment associated cost, RTI, sustainability of summer programs, instructional materials, EL, which is in a parenthetical coordinator or translator, professional development. Does that sound about right?
I believe it does. I just want to be clear that what the state is asking is that per meeting, because I know the instructions said this is an initial brainstorm.
Yep.
But we can come back and revise these, right?
Absolutely, at any time. Yes.
I didn't want to do a bait and switch, and I told everybody say whatever you want. Now it's all going up to the state.
No. This is your initial your initial brain dump that will definitely go into those categories for right now, but things can shift. Absolutely.
Okay.
So
Jamie, did you have the master planning in that list? Look ahead for future growth. I really think that ought to be added to that.
I did have construction costs due to expansion, but if you want me to reword that, then let's do it.
No, I think let's just add it separately. I think it's one of those things that actually winds up costing if you're going to do it right. Master planning, it requires professionals and expertise, and that means some money on the front end.
Okay, good deal.
Yep.
Should haves, I had amount and ratio of assistant principals, extracurriculars such as athletic programs, arts, alternative licensure programs as grow your own, etc. I did not have anything in the nice to have or long shots. I did have categorical as pre-K and currently as a very broad category teachers.
Put snacks in the long shot. We need snacks. I mean, just no.
Packs of nabs and a Coke.
Yep.
Questions I captured were, can we consider flexibility in the law so that we can adjust as we need to down the road? Can we treat the state regs as must-haves? And is there a way to get a list of these things that are in the law? And as a new plan is under development, can we receive real-time money rather than lag? Possibly calculate multiple times per year.
Okay.
Does that sound about right?
Sounded good to me. Anybody hear anything glaring?
Okay. You'll receive them for your final approval on your end.
Okay. All right.
All right.
Well, everybody, I thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your engagement. I think that was productive. I know it was good because the time flew by, right? Any final thoughts from anybody before we wrap up here? All right. Well, I hope you have a wonderful and meaningful Thanksgiving break and everybody gets some time to themselves or with their families, whichever your preference is. And look forward to talking with you guys again. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.